There is a line in the movie A Taste of Cherry, written by Abbas Kiarostami, an Iranian. And that line that people mishear so often because it's too sharp to sit with for too long is the line that I'm about to tell you. I know that suicide is a deadly sin, but being unhappy is a great sin too. And I believe unhappiness is a greater sin than suicide. This is not an argument for allowing yourself to die. Instead, it is an accusation aimed at those who are still alive. We are far too comfortable condemning suicide because it is visible. It has an edge you can grab and physically see. It has a finality. You can point at it and say, this is wrong, without ever having to look at yourself too closely to understand it. Unhappiness is quieter, and it spreads to others, and it stays within them, and it moves throughout the room without any sort of announcement or telling everyone that it's there. And what it does is it leaves damage without a single dramatic moment to blame, without a single moment to pin the unhappiness on. Unhappiness is rarely ever treated as moral. What it is treated as something private, it's something personal, it's something you're allowed to carry with yourself indefinitely, as long as you continue functioning in life, as long as you continue showing up to work, as long as you continue conversing, as long as you don't make it anybody else's problem. However, in my opinion, that is the lie that the film presses on. That's why it's so uncomfortable to talk about. Because unhappiness never stays contained. When you live in a state of unresolved misery, you do not suffer alone. What you do is transmit it to those around you. You become sharp where you don't need to be. And you become absent when presence is required. You withdraw yourself and you resent everyone and you bruise people without ever actually touching them. You do not have to raise your voice to hurt other people. Sometimes all it takes is being so hollow and so unforgiving in the wrong places. That is what the line is pointing at. That's what the film prioritizes in that sentence, in that phrase. If sin means harm, if sin means something along any definition, the loosest definition of harm that you can apply to it, then you have to be honest about the scale and the duration of the harm. A single act that ends an entire life is tragic and it's irreversible and it's something rightly taken seriously. It is a humongous thing for someone to do, and for them to do it, it must mean something, But years of unexamined happiness can corrode so many, dozens, hundreds, tens, it can be so many relationships. It can deform families. It can teach children what love feels like when it is exhausted, and it can normalize a quiet cruelty under the banner of endurance. We are taught to moralize endurance. We are taught to treat it as if it's the gospel, as if it's something you're meant to follow. You're meant to admire people who carry their pain silently and the people who troop on in life. However, silence will never neutralize your pain. What silence does is make the pain ambient. It makes it in the background of your life, but eventually it gets to the point where it's not the background. It becomes the emotional climate to which everybody else around you has to breathe in, except yourself, apparently. And the film doesn't romanticize death nor unhappiness. What it does is interrogate indifference. It asks you why you reserve moral language for the moment somebody steps off the edge of the building, but refuse to apply it to the long and the sanctioned erosion that precedes that suicide. Why you treat despair as if it's something acceptable as long as it's productive. And as long as it doesn't disrupt the surface, why should you, look at someone's unhappiness? Why should you force yourself to treat their life if they don't want that treatment applied to them? The uncomfortable implication that the film makes, in my opinion, is just this. If you accept a life of quiet unhappiness without any sort of question, you are not choosing neutrality. You are choosing a form of damage that unfolds slowly enough to be socially tolerated, slowly enough to the point where you don't actually see it, but it affects everyone around you so much. And that doesn't mean that unhappiness is a crime that you have to, avoid at all costs. It's not something that you immediately have to solve. It just means that it matters to your life. It means that it isn't just your burden. It shapes how you speak. It shapes how you interact with other people and how you touch and how you listen and how you affect the lives of those people around you. It determines whether you meet those other people, whether you meet new people or existing relationships with openness or defensiveness, with generosity or depletion, with, kindness or just being rude to them. It can literally affect your life that way. You can insult those around you without ever intending it, just because of your own internal happiness. So unhappiness, not happiness. Now, the line from the movie, The Taste of Cherry, is not actually saying that unhappiness is worse than death. It's not saying that being unhappy is worse than killing yourself. Because obviously, like I said, suicide is a very serious topic. You cannot just discredit it just because this film talks about it. However, what it is saying is that unhappiness is taken far too lightly as a sin for how much harm it actually causes in so many people's lives. It's saying that we've learned to fear the ending far more than we fear the decay that leads to the ending. And decay, when it is left alone, destroys so much more, and it destroys quietly, and it's so much, more impactful than any single act ever could actually be. There is no resolution offered with decay. There is no prescription to it. It is just a demand for honesty. If we're going to speak about sin at all, just speak about sin as a factor, maybe it shouldn't be reserved for those dramatic exits such as suicide. Maybe it should apply to the long refusal to live your entire life truthfully. Maybe it should be spent to the years numbing your mind and postponing things and inflicting small violences upon others and yourself through absence and bitterness just because changing feels too costly to you. And the film leaves the question open on purpose. It leaves the question so that me, you, anyone else can interpret it the exact same way as they want to. I may interpret it this way. You may interpret it a different way. I do recommend you watch the movie. But the film leaves it open for a specific reason. And it is not to glorify death, but instead simply to ask the question of why we are so willing to tolerate lives that are slowly poisoning everyone else's life around them. Slowly poisoning their friends and family. And it doesn't even have to be close relationships. It can be the stranger on the street who just says hello to you and you shrug them off. You might upset them just because you're unhappy yourself. If you're reading this, if you're watching this, if you're hearing anything that I'm saying to you right now, and that thought feels uncomfortably close at all, it feels anything, you feel resonant with it a tiny bit. It can be a lot, it can be a little. That is not a verdict. What that is a signal, and a signal is meant to be noticed, not ignored.